Hello, Perceptionists.
Welcome to Perceptionists Anonymous.
I'm Emily.
I'm Christy Ann. And today we have such an exciting show ahead of us. It's going to be a little cerebral, but we'll try to make it fun. Today we are welcoming leading researcher, best-selling author, and keynote speaker, Freddy Silva. Freddy, how are you today?
I'm pretty good. Looking sunny. Trying to look like George Clooney, but I'm in shadow, so you can't tell who's who. It'll be a competition.
Yeah, maybe it'll make you look more like George Clooney, man.
Well, we're so stoked to have you on today. For our listeners who maybe aren't familiar with your work, what kind of work do you really do? What is kind of your passion and your area of focus?
I think it falls under the idea of restricted history. Things that we've been taught in school and in big books and lots of television programs, but it's not really the truth when you actually sort of delve more into it. There's actually a lot more information behind the scenes that gets left out, which tells you a much bigger picture of what was happening on in the world thousands of years ago, and also ancient mysticism and knowledge, things that for which we would have been burnt alive talking about them right now. If we were doing this 400 years ago, we'd be getting a knock on the door from the Holy Inquisition, and you get that burning smell of flesh in about half an hour. So that's what I'm involved with, restricted history and ancient information.
Yeah, we recently just did an episode on that whole time period and the fact that, I mean, what is it, close to a million people burned or hung or stoned to death during the Holocaust period. I think that we stand on their shoulders, but thank you.
Exactly. And that wasn't just the people who were tortured to death. That was, there's some very highly illustrated books on the methods of torture, which goes into 3 volumes, as if the first one wasn't bad enough as it is. And I have to say, if I was an alien coming to Earth and these are the only 3 books that you find, you think, you know, humans are really clever. They made up incredible ways to kill each other or tear their bodies apart. But you know what? They didn't do much else.
Yeah, you would think so.
That's where it ends.
You could have applied this to something a bit better. So.
Well, that and then the plastic remnants, I think another 1,000 years we'll really have made a name for ourselves, I guess. God, that's awful to think about.
This company is made of plastic. Move on.
Right? Oh my gosh.
So how did you get into this very specialized field of study? Like, I know many of us are very passionate about this, but you've written books, you've done so much extensive research. Like, what pulled you to really dive into this like restricted history field?
Curiosity and boredom, which is a very dangerous combination. I was drawing pyramids when I was 3. I mean, I was hanging out with dinosaur eggs when I was 7 years of age. I used to collect them. I used to go for a walk after school, and there'd be like a dinosaur egg, and you'd add it to your collection. It was just kind of fun. I mean, I never really got excited about things around us. They're kind of just there. But the more exciting thing was the past, and why did people build with big stones when a brick would have done? Why did they shield incredible concepts of initiation in highly complex books? You know, what was it about? It was kind of like the need to know, the quest to find out something really deep, because these people lived their lives in a very different way. They achieved incredible things, and they were also incredibly spiritual. So I thought, what were they up to? And sort of once you open that door, there's 15 doors behind there. And before you know it, you're in this rabbit hole, which has no end. So yeah, and so traveling around the world, looking at more of the things that they built, it just opens up another possibility into how we can actually apply what they learned into our era. And you can, just because these things are thousands of years old doesn't mean they're irrelevant. It just means that they had a different way of looking at it. So today, for example, I just came back from Egypt 2 weeks ago, and we're looking at big pyramids and things, and 10 days later, people are not the same. And so these temples are alive. They have something to say. They have a story which can be useful in our daily life, and people do change their lives, after a trip to these places, and they're much improved. So that's what the draw really was. It's about sort of teaching people about self-improvement when you come down to it.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I think that that's something that I know that Emily and I both wanted to like make a focus on, is the people that listen to our podcast are typically like throughout 2020, people are going through some rude awakenings and they're really like developing their spirituality, and whether at one level or another. But we're thinking of how can, like, what knowledge can be translated into, like, how can this be relevant to an everyday person's everyday life? Like, you're talking about self-improvement. Do you have any specific ways that has impacted your life or could impact their life?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you just walk into an ancient temple, and we know that the laws of physics are very different inside than they are outside. You don't have to be a believer to even notice this. You just walk through the entrance, and that's why it's called the entrance. It's entrancing you. You go into this verified space, which we now have the technology to measure, and it's all based on the manipulation of gravity and electromagnetism, which of course is what we're made of. And you're walking into a kind of a large version of yourself made of stone, and everything in these temples is a mirror image of the perfection of nature. So the numbers, the geometry, the alignment, all of these things are kind of a microcosm of what happens outside. So if the world outside is perfect and we as people are imperfect, you know, because, you know, someone took my girlfriend, I can't get a boyfriend, someone scratched my chariot, and so forth. You know, we start getting a little bit, I know it's a bummer when that happens. So when that happens, you become kind of broken inside. You start going into fear and panic, and that's the worst place you can be. So the idea is that you walk into a temple and you are reminded of your perfection. And it happens in people in many ways. Sometimes they'll have an apparition approach them, which will, you know, scare the living daylights out of you, but they're there to help you. They really do exist, believe me. Or they'll have like an image that's presented to them, or a thought, or whispering that comes with them, or just they have this amazing vision that suddenly is presented to them, usually because of something that they were looking for. And when they leave, they'll write some notes, and before you realize it, they realize that the answer's been given to them, and then they start applying it. That's the easiest way, just to venerate a local sacred site and just hang out there with a sandwich or a drink and just be away with the fairies, literally, and see what happens, because there's a chemical exchange that goes on. That's the easiest way. The most complex way is then to read some ancient books on how did I get from here to there, and what's the process. Now, you could spend years researching this stuff and reading about it, applying it. One of the most famous ones is the Tao Te Ching, which gives you all of these problems which you have to solve. They're mental exercises, but slowly you realize that these exercises are also shifting your area of focus and of consciousness. And then before you realize it, you're looking at your everyday events with a very different eye. You're not getting caught up in the cause and effect, kind of like social media. People tend to overreact in seconds without realizing what they're reading, because they have no context. And it gets people into all kinds of troubles and knots on the inside. So the trick is to take a step back from normal life and be patient and observe what's going on around you, make a calculated, educated decision about the world around you, and then you're in control of the outcome. You don't have to react. If you react, you have much more of a tool with which to react and interact with people in an unjudgmental way. These are very basic concepts which became the focus of early religion, and they do work. A bit like, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife, and things like that. There's simple things which we forget about all day long, and they open you up to recognizing, I can actually be in control of this, not somebody else. Not a little box that you sit there twiddling away with your thumbs all day long, which, by the way, I don't even use a cell phone, by the way. I think I use my cell phone 3 times a year for emergencies. It's crazy, isn't it? So, yeah, this is how it works. It's about training you to stop reacting in a world of cause and effect in order to be in control of your own life. And if you can do that and develop a degree of control over fear, you're 50% ahead of everybody already. And that's the basic foundation for any spiritual teaching. Learn how to control your fear, learn not to react, and just take a deep breath and go, be in control.
I love that. With that knowledge too, and I wondered this throughout, just so the listeners know, right now, Freddy is promoting one of his newest book. He's written many books, and this book is called Forgotten Lands. And as I was reading some of this book, I thought about this too, of really what made people forget some of this ancient knowledge that was so intrinsic for thousands of years of building these temples and overcoming these fears and reminding people of their perfection. And now so many people have kind of lost a lot of that knowledge and we're just now kind of coming back to it to bring it to the forefront of conversation again. And so in your opinion, or with your research and your background, what do you think is one of the main reasons for that?
Death, persecution, torture. Yeah, I mean, basically Western religion, which is basically the Catholic Church, is a huge fraud. And all you have to do is look at early Christianity, which is very Buddhist. And it's a completely different spiritual system, completely different. These people hate the world. They hate anyone that's a woman, anyone who's gay, and I'm not even gay. I support these people. So they're against so many of the beliefs that even Jesus himself was teaching. So how can we go right when this is the foundation of Western spiritual belief? It has nowhere to go but downhill. It's a control mechanism. So what you got to do is strip all this away and recognize that anyone who's had any idea that sort of a creator, God, if you like, is not out there, it's in here. Okay, we're all expressions of something that gave birth to the universe. And as long as you hold that, you are not separate from the very thing that gave you birth in the first place. And I'm talking about your mother and father. I'm talking about, the management. So this is the central idea of self-improvement and also of control. And that was anathema to the Western religion. And that's why it's gone underground. So anyone who professed this in a village square, in a pub, even right now, as we're doing right now, you get that knock on the door and next thing you know, you're being hand-drawn and quartered. So this is why it went underground. People were much more careful, but the information exists. You just have to you have to put more effort into looking for it. And it exists in different forms. For example, in the Middle Ages, it was the Invisible College or the Council of the White Brotherhood, and they kept changing their names to avoid persecution. The Knights Templar were another group, and so forth. So it's always been there. It's just that sometimes it's just not politically convenient. This is live, people. This is very live. I think your postman just arrived.
Sorry.
I think your postman just arrived.
They can hang out. I'm busy.
I love this. This is wonderful. So it's always been there. It's just that it's up to the curious to go and look for the information, and it doesn't just come at you. You have to make the effort, and if you are willing to make the effort, it's always been there. So and sometimes it kind of works, like when the Renaissance was born out of the bubonic plague in Europe, kind of like COVID, If we think we're having a bad time now, the potential to a great order is going to be exceptional. So there are good things coming out of this. Absolutely. So the idea is that you have to look for it. You have to want to find this. And then when you do, something miraculous happens. All these books and people start coming at you, and you realize you're a part of a small knit group of people who are there to help. It's kind of like a benevolent Jehovah's Witness program, where you actually want to hear what they have to say. And it's founded on a foundation of pure non-judgment where everybody benefits. So yeah, it's always been there. You just have to make the effort to go and look for it.
One thing that I read in your book, and I wrote this down because I found this so well written and so curious, is we've always heard the saying, history is written by the victors, but I really appreciate that you wrote, overturning history is written by the victorious and promoted by the complacent. And I don't know what it was, but I feel like that just struck me so strongly. And I think that I find that, I guess, in analysis and constant analysis of other people and of myself, we can only be blamed so far. We're all doing our best, and we're all trying, we're talking about being on the cell phone and stuff, and we're all freaking human, and we're all trying our best to get through the day and to find meaning and create meaning. And finding and creating meaning is sort of like swimming upstream at this point, where we have no connection with our food. We have no connection, we're being physically removed from one another. But I don't know, promoted by the complacent. I feel like I'm going to be thinking about that for a long time.
Well, because someone states something as a fact, and then everybody else copies that fact, and it becomes accepted as gospel. That's what I mean by complacency. No one questions the fact. Now, this is a very good one. In fact, I talked about this last night with another program. America, okay? where does the word come from? It doesn't come from Christopher Columbus. And people will say, oh, it comes from Amerigo Vespucci. Well, actually, no, it doesn't. That was actually made up by an amateur priest in Germany. I think it was in the 18th century.
And it stuck.
And he cobbled together, he fancied himself as an amateur historian, which is cool. But he cobbled together all of these facts, which actually had nothing to do with each other. And he had the information published. Another magazine saw the article and said, hey, that's a good idea. We'll print that. And before you know it, it's on a treadmill. No one questioned it. Now, if you're into esoteric teachings, you'll find the connection to who created America. You find out who these people were. Now, there are a bunch of Freemasons. These Freemasons had a meeting in Paris. They talked to other Freemasons who had an understanding of where their information comes from. Follow the trail all the way back to the Middle East, thousands of years ago. This information is really, really old, and it's about self-empowerment. And one of the things that the Westerners learned from the people of the Middle East thousands of years ago is that the initiate, the mark of the initiate is always to keep seeking. You're never satisfied with an answer. So the mark of the initiate was to follow a star in the west. You're following that trajectory of the sun into the horizon, into the other world. The idea is that all the best information is not really around us. It's hidden in another level of reality. And to get there, you have to go through a certain initiatic process. So to put this into the nutshell, they said you always have to follow this star in the west. And they weren't talking about the sun. The star was called Medica. So America literally is the star of the west, the star of the initiate. And it was founded by a group of guys who wanted to see, just for once, they actually had our interest at stake. They said, this is a chance for people moving out of this horrible environment called late medieval Europe to get a chance to be better people. So the ideal was very humanitarian when it first began. And in fact, we weren't killing Native American people when we arrived. We were actually hanging out with them. And they saved our lives, if you read the original reports. It was only later when the opportunities arrived that the problems began. So that's just one idea of what I mean by the complacent. You know, the idea gets rolled around again and again and again. And before you know it, you're regurgitating a fact, which actually is an untruth. It's not really a lie. It was kind of innocent. You can't really call this priest a liar because he didn't make it up to deceive people. He just thought he was being very honest. So yeah, you got to question these things.
It feels like all one big Shakespeare play, like the way, like the different overlapping things, and like the misunderstanding of one truth that leads through. It truly feels just like on a, on a micro level, it's like a Shakespearean play, but on a macro level, it's like
all the world's a stage, and we are mere players. Yep, exactly. And he's absolutely right. It's a very Buddhist thing where the world is an illusion. Well, it's not an illusion. It's really physical. I mean, this table is very physical. It's not an illusion, but you are living a kind of illusion because you are not, this is not who I am. Who I am is actually this. I have a soul. My soul is trapped in this physical body. That's who really I am. And you spend your whole life looking to find out who you really are. So you go and do podcasts, you go to watch films on Gaia, you get DVDs, you buy books, you go to conferences, you spend your whole life trying to figure out who you are and why you're here. Yeah. That's the whole point. So the whole world really is a stage. So the thing that the spirit world always says is, don't take it too seriously and don't beat yourself up too much, because if you were that perfect, you never would have incarnated in the first place. The only reason why you're here is because you have to improve yourself. So don't take it too seriously, because you're bound to make mistakes. And the point of making mistakes is that you can learn. The trick is don't get into the habit of making too many mistakes. That's where you really go wrong. So yeah, no, it really is true. It's kind of a big experimental waste station, the Earth. I actually call it the sandbox of the universe, because we come here to play and we make castles, and some people come along and they kick the castle down, because that's the way Earth is. You get bullies and you get creators. You get a bit of both. And in the end, you have to judge yourself and figure out, well, how did I do with my 88 years of life? Did I make a progress? Did I improve? Have I improved lives of others? Have I left the planet in a better place than I found it? Those are the big questions we should be asking ourselves.
Oh, go ahead, Emily.
Well, I was just saying, yeah, it's just it's reality of preservation and ruin. I think that's like a Brandon Sanderson quote coming out of
Absolutely.
But yeah, that's what it is. It's a reality of preservation and ruin, and in both kind of senses of that, and how both are essential for creation at the core of it.
Absolutely. I mean, any physicist listening in, which I hope they are, will understand this. It's called the law of cause and effect, or chaos and order. There's only two things in the universe. There's chaos and then there's order. And as soon as you have order, it's already moving into chaos, and as soon as you get to chaos, it's already moving back to order. It's just like the tide of the beach. The tide of the beach doesn't sit still. It goes in and it goes out. That's basically the metaphor of life. You know, it's always a movement.
Yeah.
And everything in between that too.
It's kind of simple when you think about it, but it requires you to learn so much to understand that simplicity. And that's the paradox of life. You know, we're looking for something very profound to change us. But the answers are very simple, but paradoxically, you have to know a lot to understand that little. You see what I'm saying? These are the wonderful paradoxes of spirituality.
Well, being able to separate yourself from it, and then that's a whole, it's like a muscle. I think that's something that came to mind when I was reading your book about the idea of, we have our civilization. And I know that for myself, I'm amongst many other people that are constantly worried about, are we doing the right thing? Or who's running the politics? Anything like, are we going the right way? Are we doing the best that we can? And then you have all of these written accounts of our Earth being destroyed anyway. Like, we pass through this asteroid belt twice a year, and then all this work that we could be doing could totally become null and void at some point at all. And it's
absolutely,
that puts things in perspective.
But the thing is, the ancients were very stoic about it. They recognized what was going on. They had an obsession with the sky. I mean, even if you go to a simple stone circle, they would be measuring the positioning of things in the sky. And now you and I can go out in the middle of a lawn, get a bunch of sticks, and we can figure out very easily in half an hour where the sun and the moon is going to be throughout the year. It's not that difficult. So why build big monuments in stone? The idea was that you have to figure out where the Earth is relative to everything else. And they recognized that sometimes things come out of the sky and we get obliterated. But the trick was not to lose the connection, because, you know, humanity's been around for much longer than we accept. And the trick is to learn from the mistakes of the previous people, and also understand that if, you know, destruction is upon you, people are going to survive. The trick is, how are you going to make sure that the knowledge of our predecessors survives to be of use to the successors? That's the most important thing. So we don't have to go back to being cave people, dragging our wives by the hair into the cave, or the women dragging the men by their, you know, legs into the cave. You know, let's be fair about it. We can have a bit of balance here. And the point is,
it is 2021.
Exactly, you know, man, come into the cave. Wow.
He's like, okay, I'm coming. I brought
or girlfriend, come into the cave.
Yeah.
Anyway, so yeah, the whole point is that is to ride any kind of calamity elegantly, upright. Don't fall into it. So right now we're in the middle of the chaos of COVID. I've led 3 very successful tours to Egypt in the middle of this catastrophe. We've had the best time of our lives. Why? Because we take calculated risks. You know, we make sure that we're not a risk to other people. If you're in a crowded room without any ventilation, yeah, put a mask on your face, because you're just being disrespectful to other people, and you might actually catch something. But if you're out in the open air, chances are, if you're looking after your own health, the chance of you getting anything is very, very remote. So we're very lucky. So the idea is to take calculated risks, get out there, and just live life. That's the most important thing you can do. And the trick is to ride these waves elegantly, not fall into the fear, have a backup plan. You've got to have plan B all the time, okay? And not fall into this massive amount of media. I'm not saying all media is bad. You've got to pick and choose what you're listening to, and put a big box around you to make sure most of that rubbish, and there's a lot of rubbish out there, doesn't impregnate your life, because that's where you start falling apart. You're coming under the scrutiny of other people's opinions. They're not even facts, they're opinions. And that's when you fall down. So today, if you want to maintain a much more level of equilibrium, figure out where the good information is. Find out people who really are investigating things without a political agenda. It's very hard, but it's there. And two, what are you going to allow in? What makes you happy? And what makes you fulfill your life every single day and say, actually, that was not a bad day at all. I made a little bit of money. I made someone happy. Someone made me happy. That's all you really need. Oh, and of course, you got food in the belly. We don't really need that much to keep going. So it's the whole point is to develop a kind of a doctrine where you have a fundamental basis upon which to form your own life, and don't worry about others. Other people take care of themselves, okay? But if you can do yourself a favor and stand as an example to other people will copy you. That's the most important thing. Gandhi had the best line. He said, be the change you wish to see. Mm-hmm. It was so simple. I actually missed that guy because not only was he a lawyer, he had the best quotes and they all made a lot of sense. Mm-hmm. Enter your garden and one of your neighbors will copy it and the other one won't. Who cares if they do or don't? The fact is that you have food to eat and you've actually influenced someone else to do the right thing. And the other guy will hate you, but who cares? That's his problem. So that's the best thing to do, is to make sure that whenever you're in the middle of chaos, set some rules and some boundaries and a foundation for yourself. And you'll find that 90% of the warriors that are around you actually don't really exist until you allow them into your life. And we forget this all the time. It's a very basic teaching, not to allow things in your life that will, stick the little fork in there. Like when you're checking out Facebook, there's always one moron that will just twist you. All you have to do is go delete. It's like a non-violent way of killing someone. Just delete. And it gives you so much pleasure because you're saying, and it works, and you're not going to go to jail for it. Yeah, you just click delete. They're no longer alive. They're not even your friends anyway. You didn't even know who they were. You know who your friends are. And I think we forget this in this modern age. We are so bombarded with so much noise that we forget to hear the music all around us. That's the most important thing to remember.
That's beautiful. Or choosing forgiveness,
And drink heavily and listen to good rock music. That's also very important.
Essential.
I'm for the latter. Yeah.
Just to talk a little bit, you said you lead tours to Egypt. What are those tours about? Could you expand a little bit on those for our listeners? Because I know I'm fascinated by it.
I want to talk about your book more.
There's about 300. Well, actually, the tours are actually based on the book and about the work. It gives me a chance to actually show people by example what I'm writing about. So it's very abstract when you talk about temples behaving like organisms, or the fact that there's certain teachings that you see on a wall that helps you how to build a temple in your own home. Right now, I'm actually inside a stone circle, and you can't see it. It's very subtle. I'm on a line of energy, sitting to you where I am right now. The only line of energy that runs through the building is the only place where I can put my desk, oddly enough. So I'm in my own temple. This is the stuff that I've learned. So when I do tours, I actually tell people, get off the blackberries, blueberries, boysenberries, and lingonberries. Leave them at home, back at the hotel. Don't check your email. Don't go on Facebook, because you'll ruin the experience. For 10 days, I'm going to take you out of the 21st century. We're going to be walking about in temples that are close to 12,000 years old. And these things were built to last until our time because we'd forgotten our connection. And I guarantee you that in 10 days' time, you are not going to be the same people. And in 10 days later, these people have a completely different view of the world because they've seen things, they've experienced things, even if just for a second, and they've changed. There's something about their outlook that really has changed. And when they get back to the airport, they recognize that the 21st century is jarring. You can hear the security alerts and the having to take off your shoes and your belts, and there's COVID here and there's problems here and someone blew up someone over there. Yet you see how much of the world around you really affects you if you allow it. So the idea is to go and interact with the sacred space to see the perfection of the universe in front of you. And when you do that, it really hits you in the face how easy it is just to come under the influence of a perfect building, a perfect room where you are connected with something greater than yourself. You can call it a god or a bunch of gods. The ladies, of course, love hanging out with the Temple of Isis for obvious reasons. And they do. And because I've got very good connections now in Egypt with the guards, they allow us to do a little bit of quiet woo-woo work, which is, you don't do that in an Islamic country, but they allow us 15 minutes just to have a quiet moment in the main part of the temple where we can connect. Yeah, and just to be quiet and hear the room. And when people come out, they are completely still and relaxed. You can see their shoulders have come down. That's what the tours really are about. It's about connecting with something much finer. My favorite one at the moment, which is the tour of Scotland, where I only take 6 people. Try to pull someone away from a stone circle after 3 hours by yourself in the middle of nowhere, sometimes with some sheep or some cattle that happen to come and join you. And it's great fun. It's you can't pull people away after that, and you have to remind them we have to get to the only local airport which has the only flight back to the mainland, and it leaves in an hour. Okay, well, just 5 more minutes. Okay, I can drive really fast, but 5 more minutes. Yeah, because you're now connected with another level of reality. You've interacted with something much softer, and you are there. You are completely there, and you're downloading information. You're feeling the structure, and it does something to you. It really does alter you on a very fundamental level. So when you take that home and you apply it, yeah, you're now in control of your daily life. That's a great way to be.
Absolutely.
And we also drink a lot of scotch as well.
Yeah. You're changing lives, Freddie. That's really like, I don't know. That's really incredible. I bet I would love to hear some other people's stories about what happened
Oh,
to their
they
lives
have
afterwards.
lots of them. They have lots of them.
I bet, yeah.
I mean, you live in the US now, and obviously we're in the US, and we don't have as many of those sacred structures. And I know you've also done work with like crop circles and things like that. So do you find that there is places where, you know, over here in the US, and also I know in South America you do a Peru tour and things like that, where you can go find those similar experiences if you can't necessarily travel to Scotland or Egypt?
Oh, they're here. There's a lot of sites in America. It's
Yeah.
just that for the most part in the last 20 years, America was covered by an ice sheet,
Right.
which means that if anything was built here, it's gone, completely disappeared. But Native Americans rarely, if ever, built anything because you know what? They're so connected with the land, they can see the energy, they can feel it. The temple is really nothing more than a physical interpretation of an invisible force that you can't see. So when we forgot to feel the land, like Aboriginal people can do all the time, they just started to build structures to let you know where the energy is. That's what a temple really is. But you can walk the land anywhere in North America and go, hey, this feels really good here. Yeah, it does. It's kind of like sitting in a coffee shop. And I can't tell you how many pastry shops and coffee shops in America, usually run by independent people, they have carefully chosen that building and that location because they felt something was right there. It wasn't just because it was good for business. They had a certain understanding of the feel of the land, that there was something there before. And I found myself again and again going to certain places to have coffee and not others. And and because I do this so often, I can see energy now. So I go and sit in a certain coffee shop and I go, it feels really good here. And I look around and yeah, there's this little swirl of energy coming out of the ground. And I'm thinking, yeah. And the owners, when you get to know them, they're very spiritually inclined. So they knew what was going on. They may not have known intellectually, but they felt something was right there. So in North America, we have the Native American mounds, and they're everywhere. They're not as impressive as, say, Sacsayhuaman in Cusco in Peru, but you know what? You get the same hit. There are a lot in Ohio and along the Mississippi Valley. There are a lot in California, where you are. If you go down to Catalina Island, there's an entire race of giants that used to live out there only, 100 years ago? And they had their own particular places where they hung out. So if you find out where the native people used to hang out, guaranteed that there's going to be a sacred site there. If you make it out to San Francisco, on the other side of the Golden Gate Bridge, there's Mount Tam. That's a major power point for the local people. And there's a stone seat there made of serpentine, which the locals will tell you where it is. If you can sit there and look down past Sausalito back to the Golden Gate Bridge, about 15 miles away, there's a magnetic spot on that piece of stone, which happens to coincide with the back of your neck, which is exactly where you want a good download, because the people that have been sitting there for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years left their impressions there, and you're picking up their energy too. So it's downloading it through your spine into your electrical system, and it's charging you. So yeah, we don't give ourselves much credit in this country for what exists here, but there's a lot of stuff here. But like I said, you've got to work a little bit harder because they didn't build things which are very overt. That the energy is already in the land. You go where the native people used to hang out. So you got to do a little bit of homework.
I feel like you just described the exact reason I've never left Lake Tahoe. that feeling of like I can see it and know it, sense it, hear it, and
Exactly.
so
Yeah,
I
and there's
appreciate
something
it.
around Lake Tahoe as well. I mean, the native people used to hang around that area for very good reason. It wasn't just because the waters were beautiful, because there's a palpable feel in the land. So, yeah, check out ironically, if you check out the early church records of the settlers, you'll find there would have been something there where the native people used to congregate, and that's where you go. And hopefully there won't be a shopping mall in it. That's the hard part.
Have you been to Tahoe?
It's just trees.
No, but I just know a lot about it.
Yeah.
Well, a couple of my favorite rock stars happen to live there, so I kind of feel I know them.
It's very interesting having grown up in the area, you know, like visiting around and then like explaining what it's like, because it's a small town. I mean, that's a whole other set of topics, you know. But I guess there's a lot of room, and it's interesting seeing the people that come that congregate that area that can appreciate it. I guess it's different being from somewhere and then visiting or moving to another place, because you can resonate with that area and see the excitement of it.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
So
Anyway.
will you talk a little bit more about your book and tell the listeners a little bit more about what this book in particular is about? Because you have many books. This one is
Missing
so
Lands.
powerful and such potent energy.
What, the Missing Lands?
Yes,
absolutely.
Well, the Missing Lands was really an investigation into who was here before us and why they built what they did. I mean, we all talk about a missing ancient civilization that ran parallel to humans 12,000 years ago, but no one's ever asked, who were these people? Were they connected? And also, what did they want with us? Because the one thing that I kept hearing from every culture around the world is that they're always associated with the constellation Orion. And many people said they actually came from Orion or used to go back to Orion and back to Earth in physical form as well as in spiritual form, whether it was through a structure or a spaceship or a special metal throne. I hear this all around the world. But at some point, they used to take a lucky human being with them to show them a better way of life. And they used to bring the person back. And they used to say, hey, we don't have to be hunter-gatherers and killing things and, and killing each other. We can do a lot better with ourselves. And then, of course, they'd become the wisdom keepers of the tribe. So the Missing Lands was really an idea of who were these people? How did they interact with humans? And how did we end up learning civilization from them? Because that's what happened. So 12,000 years ago, there was already signs of a civilization which was already very, very old. And they were described as human-like, but not quite human. So they were very tall, about 8.5 feet tall, red-haired with green eyes, blonde with blue eyes, and very light-skinned. And they used to have to cover their skin with a kind of a liquid because they had a problem with the sun. The earth was warming up and they were used to a much colder environment. So they called them the shining ones as a metaphor, but also because they were much more educated, they gave them a certain shining appearance. So these people were the ones that survived the Great Flood, and with the surviving humans, they alighted at certain places along the earth, and those are the hotspots where humans mysteriously discovered civilization at the same time, 8,500 BC. So that's what I wanted to look at. You got another postal delivery. So they wanted to find out, how can we help humans become more than just hunter-gatherers? How can we make them appreciate the things that we used to do? And that's where the book began. And then I began to realize that we've been looking at all these gods as different people. Well, once you start understanding what they were called and you start looking to dead languages, you begin to realize actually the words do mean something. The names are not names, they're titles. So suddenly I'm in New Zealand and I find that there's a story that goes back to Easter Island 12,000 years ago, and they interacted with the gods called the Urukeu. They used to travel the Pacific as easily as you and I go shopping for groceries. And at one time, they were caught in the flood. The waves were huge in the middle of the Pacific, but they survived. And they were connected to the gods of South America called Viracocha and his shining ones. And they were connected to the Egyptian gods who had just started building their temples along the Nile. So the ball starts rolling. I began to realize this was an international brotherhood and sisterhood of very educated people who really wanted the best for us. And then once they gave us the accoutrements of civilization, they'd, bugger back to where they were, because they didn't want to really interfere in our development. They wanted to see us to do it for ourselves. So it's like me giving you a computer and saying, okay, here's the instruction manual, bye-bye. See what you can do with it. You can create great things, or you can go and discover some really stupid things with computers, which of course you can, because it's just a tool. And the other point of missing land was to find out where they lived. Now, we've all heard of Atlantis and Lemuria. That's all you ever hear about. And I'm sitting in a temple, okay? So I'm practicing where I'm preaching right now. I'm sitting in a temple somewhere, and I'm going, but did they really just live in two locations, or have we been so blinkered by these stories that we're forgetting a bigger picture? And it was like this download. In fact, there was actually 8 places where they lived. And I thought, really? And I made a note of it. And I think, well, how am I going to prove this? Because the world's sea levels have risen 400 feet since the Great Flood. How am I going to find what was going on back then? Well, one by one, bits of information start coming out of the woodwork. There will be books, scientific journals, folklore, legends, and I started accumulating the information. One by one, I've pieced this all together. All the places, they're all islands, by the way. Every one of them was an island, and they're mostly now sunk under the sea. So in the Pacific, which is a big piece of water with lots of little islands, when the first Europeans went there in the 16th century, the locals said, actually, these islands are the tops of the mountains where we used to live. The land is now under the ocean, and it was an accepted fact back then. So we have several land masses in the Pacific which are now gone. There's, Kainga Nui Nui, there is Lapukije, and all these names you're not going to remember. So this is what the book was really about, where we come from. And where we come from is literally the end point of where the gods ended their story. So in a matter of speaking, we're following the story from where the gods were, and we're trying to be just like them. So here's the paradox. We're now reaching a position in our culture where we also are faced with serious ecological problems, without a doubt. We're in the middle of huge changes. Yeah. And NASA is now admitting that between 2032 and 2040, we actually stand the chance of being hit by some very large pieces of rock. And this is why they're obsessed with asteroids. I mean, they really are completely obsessed. So we're facing the same problem that they were faced with 12,000 years ago, but there is an antidote, and I'm not going to ruin the last chapter for you, because the antidote is in the last chapter. I don't like writing bad news in my books. There is always a silver lining, and I struggled with this for a while, but I found the antidote. Oh, it's so easy. It's so bloody obvious that, a 6-year-old can figure this out. And of course, we are so consumed with daily life, we forget about it. So I'll put the answer at the back. So all of you people who are Aries and Virgos, do not go to the last chapter of the book. Start from the beginning, because it won't make any sense. So this is what it was all about. It was about understanding that we've been here before. They gave us the instructions. We just have to go to the temples and the sacred sites and the teachings to understand we've been through this before. We've got all the help we need. We just have to engage with it. And if we do that, we're going to get out of this mess. And I believe we will.
Wow. Thank you so much for sharing that. I mean, some of this information is like, I know it's a lot of it that I'm just coming into contact with. Like, people talk about the idea of the Great Flood, and that's something that I found incredibly interesting, that we don't, I mean, if you could talk about that, all the different creation stories that come from that, and it wasn't just Noah's story, or, how this is a global idea.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, the Bible story is actually, it was stolen from the Babylonians, and they had stolen it from the Sumerians, and they had already borrowed it from someone much older. So it's a much older story. So the Israelites kind of twisted the story to fit their political and religious needs, as everyone does. So, but if you go back to the original story, there was actually one of many. It gives you a lot of clues. For example, Noah had to put in his ark a spiritual leader, a sage, with 7 other sages. And they were called the 7 sages, with one charismatic leader. But that story appears all around the world with different people by different names. So Horus and Osiris was another group in Egypt. There was Manu and his 7 sages in India. Japan has its own stories. Polynesia has its own stories. Even Native America has its own stories. So these were groups of intellectuals who decided that they're going to hang out on Earth, survive, and teach humans how to get out of the mess that they found themselves in. So it's not an original story. It's one of many different stories around the world. And there's about, I think to date, 180 different flood stories that survive around the world. And some of them are actually from North America. And they talk about the Chinglet of what is now Washington State. They were actually there when it happened. And they said, yeah, there were big waves and we were just very lucky to be where we were. The waves didn't kill us. They took the canoes to the top of Mount Jefferson, which is 10,000 feet. Those are big waves.
Yeah.
So we have nothing to complain about, COVID.
Right, we're told to complain.
Yeah, it was just a slight sneeze. Oh, how about a 3-mile high tsunami? Well, okay, that's a bit more serious.
Give us 10 years.
Exactly.
Well, it's super fascinating. And one other thing, when I was diving into researching some of your stuff that you've done, you've created a deck of cards that help people activate things. Could you talk a little bit about those? Because they're so unique, because it is that concept of bringing these temple structures into your home to show you this, more perfect version of what we're actually supposed to be and bringing that energy in. How do you explain more about those and how those work and what you're doing with them? Because it's really, really cool.
Yeah, it goes back to the 80s and the 90s when we were investigating the crop circle phenomenon, which if you buy into the nonsense that it was all made by 2 guys with a piece of wood and some string, you've fallen for a piece of disinformation that was brought out by the British government. The truth is that there was a real phenomenon happening all the way. And it was mostly from the early 70s until the late 90s when it occurred. It was a piece of communication. And I'll say this, I'll put this out there, it comes from a very benevolent source, and they're not necessarily human, but they're not aliens either. So essentially, they're also linked to the people who built the temples many thousands of years ago. I'll leave it at that. The one thing we kept discovering is that the real crop circles were based on the same principles as ancient temples, which themselves come with a very rich history of healing. And we began to collect anecdotes of people who were really not into crop circles at all. In fact, they hated these things. But they'd go in and they'd find that they would be spontaneously healed, and they couldn't explain that. Okay, so we just wrote these things as anecdotes, but more and more of them, there were hundreds and hundreds kept coming up. And we figured, well, perhaps we should look into this. Perhaps there's something about the energy of crop circles, which is interacting with human DNA, which is doing things to people who don't even believe in this. So it's not as if they're suggesting to themselves that I'm going to go into a crop circle and I'm going to be much better when I leave. Okay, the opposite should be happening. So we began to realize and monitor the energy and found that actually there are certain frequencies in crop circles which are not found in the human body. So when you interact with these things, something happens inside you. There's a rewiring of your neural circuitry, and it does some unusual things to people. And I say I'm one of them. I have to say that I'm not the same person that I was before I walked into these things, and it's done me no end of good, but that's my particular journey. So we began to sort of put one and one together and realize, how can we synthesize this in a way that we can teach this to people? So we began to bury bottles of water outside the crop circles and inside them, and also in man-made ones, and we sent them to laboratories under hidden experiments to find out what was going on to the water. And it turns out that the water that came from the crop circles had been impregnated with 131% of energy above normal water. They literally were coding the water. Now, a human being is made of 72% water. So we put one and one together and went, oh my God. So when you interact with these things, it's imprinting the water of people that walk into the crop circle. So no wonder something is happening. So the idea was, if you can't go to a crop circle and you haven't got access to a temple, how can you bring the crop circle to people? And being a graphic designer by trade, I just put one and one together and went, well, we've got the surveys. I can just put the surveys or the crop circles into small cards, same shape as what we used to use for resonant therapy devices and radionics devices, which were already very famous around the world. If you're into this kind of treating objects at a distance and working with homeopathy, you'll understand what I'm talking about. So I made them the same shape and size that you could put into these little slots in radionics machines to see if people would use them and see what results they got. Well, they got exactly the same results that we were getting out in the field. People would be, and I'll say the word healing in a very wide context, because I'm not allowed to mention that in America, okay, because of the FDA. So I'm not mentioning the word healing at all. You have to read between the lines. Because, you know, when you think about it, death is also a form of healing, okay? You have to think about healing in a bigger sphere. Call it wellness, or call it a balancing of the self. That's much more accurate. So we found out by measuring these symbols, or the crop circles in symbol form, that they do maintain the energy of the original when done in a certain way. And I can't reveal that. I'm on pain of death to reveal how that is done, and it's not important. But the important thing is that there is a transmission of energy from this symbol into the organism that is the human body, and it can be done across space and time. And some of the things that I get back from people, over 20 years, no one's ever asked for their money back, and I've never advertised this at all. I let these things find their own people, and some of the stuff that I get back from people is mind-blowing. I mean, we knew that there were unusual things happening, but some of the things that people use these cards for and the results that they get leave me speechless still to this very day. So yeah, it's like magic, but there is a science behind it, and it's very magical. And it goes back to something that one of the original people who were contacted about the crop circles back when we didn't know what one was, a very famous channeler in England, and she was told that from the source that these symbols were going to be used for harnessing the energy of the earth, to balance the earth, to buy humans time to let them work out. They're in the middle of huge earth changes and to prepare. So it's a bit of a warning. And two, to send information to the scientific community with these symbols to allow new ideas to get us off carbon-based fuel, you see. And so far, there are scientists who have built some of the crop circles as 3D, and they said, oh, they're anti-gravity devices, they're self-propelling. So watch this space, because we're waiting for the right political moment for this to come out. So there are great things happening in the background. And this was all predicted through a channeler who received the information from the people who were making the crop circles. And part of that was to do also with the fact that there are symbols that have to do with the wellness of people, and to also to help them open up to who they really are. And that's where we put one-on-one together and realize these things activate people at a cellular and the molecular level. So it's real magic, but it's practical magic.
Well, I mean, what is magic, which is stuff science hasn't understood yet? I mean, they're the same side, you know, two different sides.
Exactly. It's like electricity and light bulbs. You know, back then we called it magic. Now it's just, well, here's a light bulb. I can go out and buy one. Well, back then that was magic when that was created. Harnessing the energy of the sun and putting it into a little glass of bulb. Well, that's pretty magical, isn't it? And now it's just every single day.
They're incredible, man. We're adorable. I mean, get all the stuff we're trying to create for ourselves, make it a little bit easier to get through what we have no idea what we're here for.
Exactly. I mean, we now have tests to actually determine that we can actually use the power of guided intent or focused intent to alter things around us. I mean, anybody from Tibet and Nepal and the Far East, and even in Native America, knew about this, you know, thousands and thousands of years ago. But today we have machines that can actually measure your intent as a packet of energy that can be sent to somewhere. One of my favorite experiments was done at Princeton, where they actually put 20 people in a room, and they were taught to focus their intent. So you're going to have the same thought going to an object, and the object was a computer, and the computer was generating this beat, like a drum beat, regular drum beat. So boom, boom, boom. The idea was, if you get 22 people to focus the same intent on that machine, the intent was alter the drum beat of the machine. And guess what happened? It changed. Yeah. So we can interact with a machine with just 22 people. Now, think of what would happen if there's an asteroid coming near the Earth. 1% of the population of the Earth focusing on that object, you can move it away. You can do extraordinary things. We are the gods we're waiting for. That's what the Hopi have always been saying all along. It's like a joke. So now we have the ability to measure our ability to interact with our environment. And that's where religion came in. You can't do that. That's very dangerous. Well, yeah, because you're putting a bunch of guys with little red shoes and wearing dresses out of business. And I don't mind saying that, because it really is. It's a racket. Religion is a racket. Spirituality is where we ought to be. And it's a personal journey. That's much more important. So if we can realize that we have this power within us and we can do great things, then that's very liberating. And that's where we really should be focusing our energy on.
Absolutely.
Man, I feel like there's so much to even say. I feel like this conversation could go on forever. Like, yeah, I feel like there's so many different points that I'd like to bring up. You have made a big difference, and I know that I'm sure that our listeners are pretty blown away by anything that they have. How can people find you? Yeah.
They're going straight to my website right now and buying all my books and DVDs.
And your website is?
I did that 2 weeks ago, so your mind tricks work.
They can work
the force is strong
forward,
with
right?
me today. Yeah. The force is strong with me. You'll come to my website at invisibletemple.com, and there are a lot of articles there as well, which you can keep you busy for a long, long time. So yeah, no, it's and it's part of the sharing of information to get people to, you know, the documentaries that I do, and also there to show you and open a door in your life that gets you to be where I am. Because I'm doing this from a personal experience too. I'm not saying follow me. Don't follow anybody but yourself. Otherwise, you'll get into all kinds of trouble, including me, by the way. But the idea is to empower you to go and look further. Because if you can look further, then you realize that this information actually is very truthful. And then you start taking in the tools that make sense to you, and you empower yourself. And then when you do that, do it for somebody else. And that's how the change occurs. It becomes like a very personal, very underground thing. And before the powers that be recognize what's happened, the change is already there. So this time with learning not to be burnt alive at the stake, okay? You're doing it from person to person, slowly, under the network. And you'd be surprised how many people are doing this around the world. Like Ohio, which is a very conservative state, I found more people coming to my lectures in places you've never heard of. They'll come out of the woodwork. You'd be surprised what people are doing behind the scenes quietly, not drawing attention to themselves, not being shot at by QAnon supporters, because that's how you do it. You learn to live another day. You just turn the other cheek and you go, good for you. And you just, you know, like morons. And then you just do your own thing and become the example you want to see. So there's a lot of good news around this, but you just don't get to hear it. You don't attract too much attention sometimes. It's a good thing not to attract attention and do it quietly. The change will occur.
I feel like there is starting to be almost like a market response to this, though, because the actual, like, people are starting to come out and on different social medias, and, you know, whether it's YouTube or TikTok, or even on, I think less on Facebook, but more on like Instagram, places where images can be shared and videos and that sort of thing on more of a consistent level. More people are starting to be like, hey, this is things we're learning about that are backed up this way. And it's kind of specifically with this year, with so many people home and so many people having to go through that deep introspection, and also starting to understand, like, there's more to the world than this.
Oh, absolutely. There's been some incredible ideas out there. There was one on Facebook. There's a couple of guys that designed this the easy thing to clean up the rubbish in places where there's a lot of boats and a lot of yachts. And it's a ring that just floats on the surface of the water, and it sucks in all the trash. And then they pick it up and they dump the trash in a bag, and off it goes. I mean, it's so easy. There's so many great ideas and young people doing extraordinary things. So, you know, yeah, you got half the population sitting there completely glued to their little black boxes, and they're lost. They're gone. You can't help them. But the other group are doing incredible things. They're thinking outside the box. They have the time, and that's our salvation. So never lose heart, because in any great problem or any great catastrophe, there's always the seeds of something much better. It's always been that way. I mean, look at what bubonic plague did to Europe. It gave us the Renaissance. And without the Renaissance, we wouldn't be here right now. So yeah, even in the seeds of destruction, there's always something already coming out of it. And the trick is not to get focused on the negative, but think about what the potential is that you could do. So no, I agree. I think there are great things being done by young people right now. So good for you.
Well, people talk a lot of smack about our generation,
God, I feel old now.
millennials, blah, blah, blah. I think that we're fantastic, man. I am like, I mean, I'm proud. I think that we're extremely unique. I know a lot of our generation, or at least in my experience, we've looked to the 60s and like, oh, you know, we've kind of idolized these areas. And I was like, yeah, but we've got quantum physics. And
Exactly.
I have a buddy. Oh, go on.
A budgie.
A buddy, no, this Upterra company, they're programming water to be able to create some sort of megahertz or something, so that they have to use you only use 30% less of the water, so that you're able to grow more food. And I mean, that's a small plug for Upterra, but I mean, that's just one amongst a million.
Yeah, take vulcanized tires. We have billions of tires. Take vulcanized tires, make them into little hoses, puncture them with little holes, bury them 10 inches under the soil. You can sweat water in the desert. So you use up 90% less water and you can grow plants. I mean, that's brilliant. And you get rid of a mountain of rubber that's sitting out there.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's fantastic. So it's just like, and young people now are recognizing that every decade has fantastic things. I mean, there's, I know my neighbors who used to come over to my house back in the 90s, and they're trying to impress me with the latest album from Alice in Chains, which I actually quite like. And I said, well, this is the latest record, dude. I thought, well, dude, I've already got this album. But dude, it's just come out. No, it hasn't. It came back in 1968. It's called Black Sabbath. And they'll listen to Black Sabbath and they go, wow, the 60s were radical. I said, wait till you get to the 70s. There's some cool music there as well.
Aww.
So, yeah, I think we need to rediscover different eras, because there's so much good happening all the time. You know, we just get complacent, and also we start getting, you know, distracted by a lot of things which really have not much substance to them when you really think about it. The trick is not to get diverted too much.
Yeah, that's what they do on purpose.
Yeah, well, I mean, most of my work in the businesses that I run are all about creating high vibration entertainment and high vibration fiction for that exact reason, to kind of work underneath the surface. So a lot of what you're saying feels very validating. It's like, okay, we're
good.
yeah. So that's really nice.
I'll buy shares in your company.
Oh, well, thank you. I appreciate that. I don't think it's not publicly traded exactly yet, but we're making progress. Pretty fantastic.
Next step.
And then you sell out to billions of dollars and you buy a private island. That's where the test will come in.
You mean mountain?
And then you make a temple on it. And just like
that's better. That's better.
Right. Yeah. Speaking of that, and I just want to touch on this. You touched on this a little bit earlier in the conversation, and I feel like it'd show a lot of value, and I know it's probably a larger concept, but you said you've made your own home space like a temple, and you're sitting inside a stone circle. Is there tips you have for people to do that so they can do that?
Yeah.
Okay.
In fact, I'm leading a workshop in Sedona at the beginning of May. I just put it up on my website. It's only for 30 people. I want to keep it small. And we actually learn how to build a stone circle in 8 hours. So we learn how to attract the Earth's electrical currents. We learn how to move water under the ground. We learn how to use sacred geometry, alignment, sacred measure, and the power of intent, and glue it all together. At the end of the day, boom, you've got yourself a temporary temple. I'm right now sitting in the middle of a stone circle, and you can't tell where it is. It's very carefully hidden, because I don't want people coming over for dinner and tripping over big stones. So
you don't want a megalith like next to your door? That's not your jam?
No. You can do it with small crystals that big. I mean, it's very subtle. Size is not all that it's meant to be. You can put the energy into a little crystal that big and have exactly the same power as a massive stone. Yeah. It's all about reshaping your vision. So, and I call it temple making. So, and for the people that can't afford the workshop or can't be there, I've made a DVD or an on-demand documentary if you don't have a DVD player anymore. It's you can get that on my website as well. And within a few hours, you'll know the fundamentals of how to build a Stonehenge or a pyramid. Same concept, but in a small area like a condo. Or some people I know have built a massive stone circle in their back garden. And some people who have a JCB and own at the top of a mountain in North Carolina have built a massive stone circle. So depending on how confident you are, you can do something subtle like here without any great expense. I mean, it cost me what, $20 to buy crystals for this room. The rest of it, you can be as overt or subtle as you want. And that's the fun. And my aim is to build 1 million new temples around the world, to build the grid up. We've stopped building temples over the last 1,500 years, really, with the exception of the Gothic cathedrals in Europe. But apart from that, we need to replenish the grid, because all of those temples are on the grid. And if we feed that grid feeds us back. And that's why I'm now sitting, talking to you right now, on one of the Earth's telluric currents, which just happens to run diagonally through this building. And the only place where I can put my computer is right here. So I'm now on that Earth energy. I'm now connected to every pyramid, every stone circle in the world. And this is where I do my work. So you see how it works. Mm-hmm. We're feeding the grid, and the grid feeds us in return. It's a two-way conversation. It's wonderful. So this is what I encourage people to do. Go out and build sacred space.
I do that right now.
I know. I love the
Absolutely.
emphasis of how
Operators are standing by.
I love how approachable it is for
Yeah.
it to be given to people in a way that's like economically approachable, but also just like, oh, I can buy some crystals and make a stone circle. It feels so comforting and easy to do as opposed to some massive big thing. And I feel like that's part of the kind of deprogramming we're doing
Yeah.
on a collective level.
Well, it did take me 15 years to work out.
Well, of course.
It wasn't just
You're
done
laying the
like that.
foundation.
It required observation, reading, experience, and then, of course, as the comic joke goes, I walk into the Temple of Edfu in Egypt, and it's right there in front of me. The instructions are right there on the wall, and it was only translated recently. So I didn't know that, but it was great gratification because actually it tells you how to do it right in front of you. And that's over 12,000 years old, that story.
Wow.
So they were doing it back then. It's got the gods there with their measuring rod, and it tells you about, anchoring the enemy snake, which is bad, removing bad energy. It's a different language, but it's the same concept.
Sure.
So it was all there. So I'm glad that I was actually proven that what I was doing is actually the right thing. And some of the feedback I get from people is very extraordinary, but I'll give you a warning. Be careful what you ask for when you build these things, because you might get it. And sometimes getting what you ask for might not be what you had in mind. So be careful of your intent. You got to check your ego at the door. Make sure we're doing this for the right reasons, because it's just energy. It can work. It can go both ways.
Yeah.
Energy doesn't give a damn one way or the other. It's your intent that steers it in the correct direction. Or not. I mean, it's a story of Darth Vader, isn't it? It's the best story that we have. If you want to learn about mysticism, ancient mysticism, watch Star Wars. What's Star Wars about? It's not about Luke Skywalker. It's not about Han Solo. It's not about Chewbacca or the little green guy, Yoda, although he's based on a real person, by the way. It's about the redemption of Darth Vader. Think about it. He's a Jedi. He starts off with the light. His wife he has a dream, she's going to die in childbirth. What happens? Well, he loves her, he's attached to her, of course he is. He goes into the fear mode, he wants to save her. What happens? You get the Dark Lord of the Sith seduces him into the dark side because of fear. That's the key note here. He goes into the dark side, completely goes AWOL, he loses the plot, but at the very end, when he meets his son, he realizes, I've buggered this up. I've gone completely the wrong way. And at that moment, he redeems himself and he goes back to the light. That's what you have to do. Get back into that state of balance and you'll be okay again. Even at the point of death, you have redeemed yourself, and that's the best you can do in the world. So that's essentially the story of why we're here.
Oh my gosh, I love it so much.
Yeah.
Now everybody's going to watch Star Wars.
I know. I'm like, have I even finished that movie? I don't know how it ended.
You haven't?
What
Oh,
you mean,
But
like,
don't watch number one.
It's been 15 years.
Number one didn't happen, okay? Number one never happened. It was just a bad mistake.
I don't think that's how the world works, Freddie. No, I think I'm going to watch that one first. No.
Actually, some geek actually worked it out. He said if you watch it in this sequence, 4, 5, 2, 3, and 6, it makes really good sense. And actually it does. And he also said, and we don't talk about number one. We just don't talk about number one.
So I've heard.
Okay, so final question, which is kind of a fun one. Do you have a favorite temple?
Depends how I'm feeling and what I need at the time. Yeah, it's a good question. It depends how I'm feeling and what I need. Each temple does something different. It was built for a specific reason. So, right now I'm working on a new project on Scotland. So some of the temples in the Orkney are my favorites right now because they're teaching me something about what I'm writing. And it's true. I use them as an educational tool, as a classroom for myself, so I can be a better teacher. Edfu in Egypt is always a great place to go twice a year because I need that hit of energy. Edfu is a very powerful temple for building yourself up, fulfilling your battery. It's a temple for the spiritual warrior. And I mean that not just as a man, but also for women too, because women also need to be the spiritual warrior. And it's this alignment that tells you what it's for. So when you go in, you feel that you feel the battery being replenished. So those are two of my favorites, and also the bent pyramid, because it's driving me crazy. I still haven't figured out what it's for. So those three right now are on my hit list, but 5 years from now, it'll be something completely different because I've moved on. I need a new teacher, and each temple teaches me something different. And it's the same for everybody.
I love it.
Cool.
Wow. Well, thank you so much for joining us on the show.
Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, and I know our
Wait to the very end.
this or you're listening to it, we will have it linked below for anyone who is needing those links and those sort of things. Are you on any social media or anything like that, or is it a no?
Oh, God help me, I'm on Facebook. I just set up an author page because I've reached my 5,000 friend limit. I don't know who these people are, but it's all slowly migrating to my author page. So do like me, because there's always information, there's videos or clips from the books, but also a few jokes once in a while and something really stupid just to make your day. Because you got to do stupid
I
things
love that.
and have jokes, because otherwise you take yourself too seriously. And those are the ones that get 800 likes. You know, you give people something really profound and you get 200. So, but that's the way the world works. You know. So yeah, I have a Facebook page as well, but the other stuff, I don't know, what is it, Twitter and all this stuff. I don't have time. I gotta write.
You seem to be doing pretty well.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so Facebook, follow him there. And listeners, thank you so much for tuning into the show. We genuinely appreciate you tuning in, and we just are sending you all the love for sharing this space with us. Of course, as always, you can follow us on Instagram at Perceptionist Anonymous, or like us on Facebook as well.
Or Instagram.
Or it's
cool. Good.
There you go.
I have no idea what it is. I have no idea what it is, man.
We'll link to it. We'll search you.
Well, yeah, we'll find it. It's pictures is at the core of it.
Oh, pictures. Oh, I can sell my art photography there. Wow.
Yeah.
I'll have to go check it out.
I meant to ask about that too.
I have lots of lovely prints of sacred sites. I have an entire website, which is freddysilva.com, which is where my art photography is, my side passion, taking pictures of interesting things. So that's a good place to hang out to if you've got nothing better to do.
Yeah, that's amazing.
If you want to spend a lot of money, you can certainly buy the prints. I have a guy in London who actually just bought a massive 48-inch print. It cost a fortune to ship to England, but it looks incredible. It's like you can just dive in. It's like a big stone circle picture, a gorgeous picture, but you can dive into it. It's life size. So yeah, good fun. But yeah, thanks for having me on. I hope it works.
I feel like that's what you should definitely do on Instagram, because that sounds amazing and incredible, and that's exactly what it's kind of, I think, designed for. I mean, my principal social media of choice is TikTok, but that's my own jam on that space, which is, again, little videos. Listeners, thank you so much for tuning in.
Oh, my pleasure.
And
good luck.
Again, thank you. And as always, remember, awesome. Thank you so much, Freddy.